So I had no idea what Marcelo was talking about, which is just, there's some perfect little lead-ins there that, yeah, you'll see the little bit along the way, hopefully. This is totally a prototype of a topic that I've been working on for ages. So excuse the flaws, there's some little bits that need some polish yet. I'm calling this version 0.6.1. And I'm quite happy to take audience participation along the way. Warning, controversial opinions. Quick one about me. Anyone that doesn't know me, I'm a slightly varied background developer. Started with a fine art degree, not a computer science degree. I worked on various apps over the years, Latitude, ANZ, Post, and my first one was AFL Live back in 2009, I think, which taught me about football, which I knew nothing about, like ANZ taught me about the stock market, which I knew nothing about. These days, I work at a company called HDS. Hopefully that little animation catches up. If anyone's interested, there's a URL there talking about our tech. It's a logistics management system. We also do the work as well, a bunch of warehouses and a bunch of tools that we create. Very much an iOS shop, bunch of apps that run through our warehouses, all running on iPads, iPods, iPhones. We do roughly 5 million temperature controlled deliveries a year, and nearly 1 million boxes of wine get delivered out of our warehouse as well. My controversial opinion is the word engineering, which I thought was kind of good because Marcelo had engineer on his title, which is perfectly fine. I'm just going to challenge that concept. I've got a lot of friends that are in engineering faculties. They're mechanical, they're chemical, they're electrical, all of those. I've got a nephew that's a traffic engineer, ground surveying, etc. But when I think about software development, I don't see it as engineering per se. When I look at engineering, I think of big constructions. This particular one dances in between. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, a church that's been under construction for the last 160 odd years, I think. Very much dances between engineering and craftsmanship. This is all stonework, very much engineered, but couldn't be built without the extreme fine craftsmanship that is required. The word craft has some bad connotations in a lot of cultures. It's your knitting, it's your festive crafts. But for me and my background, when I think of the word craft, I think about a finely made piece of someone that's honed their skill over many, many years. I look at things like this. It's a utilitarian object, or maybe ceremonious, whatever. But these things are made by meticulous craftsmen. I look at the craftsmanship that goes into something. It's a tool, it's a guitar, but extreme passion goes into creating these objects. And I think much about the same when it comes to software. Look at things like this, and the amount of detail that goes into these things. It's craftsmanship. I look at a piece of jewellery and a hallmark that goes on the inside. The only person that sees that hallmark is the person wearing it. And to me, it's kind of like this little thing at the top of our files. I know it's frowned upon in some enterprises to put these things in the top, but to me, it's the name of the person that created this little piece of craft. My background is actually goldsmithing before I got into code. I studied under a professor that was one of the world's knowledge resources on Etruscan gold work. 2nd century BC, this little piece, 2nd century BC. I've seen it. That's a photo I took through a glass cabinet, so it's a little fuzzy. But that whole piece, it's about this big. Made by people 2,000 odd years ago. These little things are hollow. They're decorated with tiny little balls that are about 0.1 of a millimetre. I'm pretty sure back in this day, these people had extremely poor eyesight and couldn't walk around unaided. But this is where I come from with this craftsmanship. Then 2008, iPhone SDK came out. Really butted my interest. Suddenly we had this little device we could hold in our hand. It was tactile. And I credit this SDK for really lifting software from being your average terrible Windows interface to being something that is something that you appreciate, something that's finely crafted, the icons, the touch, the ability to interact with software. In my opinion, that's really lifted the level of software ever since. It's a whole new paradigm. So when I think about handmade, I think, how many things do you have that are handmade in your life? Most things we have are manufactured, mass-produced. I look around the room, I think, maybe some of this plumbing, very much craftsman, handmade, maybe not so nicely handmade, but chairs, everything. We live in a very manufactured world. However, a lot of this manufacturing is done by hand-crafted code. It's kind of ironic. So when I look at a beautifully crafted app or game, I actually see it like a beautifully crafted piece of furniture. And there's something I was building in my garage a few weeks ago. I look at this and I think, there's some similarities there. And yeah, some of this has got to do with UI design, but the UI design can't be executed without the craft of the code. Meticulous work that goes into making this possible to view and interact with and animate. And the success of these things is often a collaboration between the designer and the developer. Don't know if anyone's held one of these beautiful little items. Even the award is a beautifully crafted item. Little example I've been playing around with. Does anyone know what this is? Vernier caliper, used for measuring things of fine degree of accuracy. When I was at uni back in that year, it was my commonly used tool, one of my best little friends in my toolkit. So when I was prototyping an interface I wanted to play with, this is a piece of code they never ever finished. I couldn't decide on the design, but the one thing I liked was the actual interaction with the measurements. Getting the clicking just right, getting it the spring, etc. And with just that craft of the code, the interaction, it was floating my boat. It was just the passion that went into creating it. Never released it. A bunch of people have had it on test flight for about the last 8 years. It was written in Objective-C, but yeah, there you go. I don't share my things terribly often, but you got to see that one. When I think about engineering, I think about these large, massive projects. I think about the planning, the hole in the ground, the massive team, the cost. And to me, this is engineering. There's not, admittedly there's some software projects where there's a lot of cost, a lot of large teams, and a huge hole in the ground full of money. But to me, where the developer really comes alive, the soul of the developer is in the craft of the code. The bit they get to do every day and get to hone their skills and appreciate to share with others. Then I was thinking about the difference between engineering and architecture. I look at this structure. There's nothing wrong with that. It holds up a roof. But something that can really be appreciated, that's the roof in the Madrid airport. Holds up the roof with beauty. Again, huge cost difference. We'll just push that aside. But the elegant construction of the engineering, that's what I'm starting to think about. Total flip side. This is like a finely crafted building, but the nightmare of the engineering under this one actually is an engineering problem. If anyone's interested in the work of Frank Gehry, crazy architect, there's a great documentary movie called The Constructive Madness. Very crazy band. Very expensive buildings. So also I think about those engineering projects, I think about massive bridges like this. From the design to the execution, nothing much changes along the way. There's a little bit of adaptation maybe in learning and failing, but it was always going to be a bridge that had to get to the other side. It was basically going to look like that. Software projects are rarely that well defined when they start to be built. I think about average software project when it buds off. It's a canvas tent. There's 2 people sleeping under this canvas tent. The intention is it's going to be an office block with 100 people working in there, but it starts out with 2 developers sleeping under a canvas tent. You don't demolish that building every year and start again. The finished project, it's kind of like there's a patchwork quilt there, still with some of those bits of canvas in there. So that's that difference between that massive engineered project that was always going to be that multi-tiered building to that software project that's finely crafted along the way. We need our tool belt. Sadly, my photo's in the middle there, ruining my similarity between the tool belt and the Xcode, but
sorry, I've been quick.
The engineers and the architects really get their hands dirty when it comes to actual construction. That's where the next team comes in, of the tradesmen, with their varied levels of execution. If you've ever had tradesmen to your house, you always know that some guys do it well, some guys do it poorly. To me, it's the same with the code. A developer often rolls up with his toolkit, full of custom little tools that he's built over the years, special jigs to do all those different things and remove the complexity of some of those mundane tasks. It's a great little toolbox. So my iPad's going berserk at me. Shut up. Many of those solutions that come out along the way are perfectly valid until the requirements change. And that's when the craftsman adapts and blends and uses his years of experience. This little example here is the ZPL code required to do an Australia Post label. No one wants to deal with that. I have a tool that I created 10 odd years ago that I still use to this day. Again, some Objective-C in there, some Swift, to remove this from my life, so I don't need to see things like this. Still sometimes look at them, but that's those toolbox, those little custom-made tools that you carry around your toolbox, you pull out for the next project. It's the Craftsman. I don't show my code very often, but this was some stuff I was playing with a few weeks ago. I need a little tool for tags. It was just for entering tags, rendering tags. I was really amazed that just out of some, 30 lines of Swift UI code, I managed to do some tags, entering, rendering, enter into the data, and also show the tools on the keyboard. Pretty simple. I'll scan away from my code so no one reads it. To me, IKEA furniture is like the anti-craft. And I was trying to look at some parodies between code and IKEA furniture, basically. And I was thinking optionals. Contrived piece of code, but to me, this piece of IKEA furniture, bunch of things. How many people get to the end of an IKEA project and discover they've missed some pieces? They're on the floor, you don't know where they went. And that's why the whole thing's rattly. To me, optionals are like that. Too many optionals. We've got to return errors because some things won't work. Okay. Just toying around with this little bit of code the other night, and to me, this fit better. Just using an enum, no error to deal with, something that fit closely, And to me, it was like a little dovetail and draw. Much more strong, little can go wrong, no wriggle room. To me, my little bit of code there that I was playing with as a sample for this was my dovetail. Another little one I was playing with, just by throwing in the type alias. There's nothing wrong with that product ID being an integer, but being a product identifier provides me with a cleaner interface all the way through, minimal code change. It's just that little craftsman tool to get out and chisel away at. This one, when I saw Marcelo's font rendering, I thought, ASCII art. You open up a file that some loving developers put some concentrated effort and time into, and you see something like that. Someone's put some craft, some love into their code and shared a diagram that allows me to understand what they're doing. I once had Oliver Jones slice up some of my prototype code, and to me it was like the master with his tools. To me there was no engineering in that. It was just pure mastery of a craftsman, cutting up, slicing, gluing it back together and making it work. Craftsman. So, prepare for contentious debate, but to me, that heavyweight structure of a building is like the massive team of locked doors and different floors. And for a small software development team, to me, it's like a bunch of little craftsmen. They can't live in this building. They're running up the stairs all day trying to find the keys to the doors. To me, the craft of the code and that small development project, it's a bunch of craftspeople in their workshop sharing the tools. So that's my little opinion, and I'd be really interested in if anyone had some code snippets to share with me to flesh this out to a greater topic. I've recently found SwiftUI is just such a beautiful tool for crafting interfaces. Yeah, it's a bit like my Japanese chisels. It has its sharp edges and they can be blunt, but it brings out the craftsmanship in the developer to enjoy their interface. That's my little share with you all. If anyone would like to share some code snippets with me, hit me up on Slack, but thank you.
Does anybody have any questions or opinions they want to throw back at Fletch? I guess to break the ice and kick us off, we've got one from Slack that you didn't use the word art enough to describe your code. What do you think?
No.
Art versus craft?
Yeah, it's another contentious debate. Art is a bit nebulous, I think. Craft is a manufacturing.
Engineering is manufacturing.
Yeah, I'll think about that a little further.
Is there a sliding scale
Maybe
between
it's because
art
I have
and
a fine art
engineering?
degree and I try to
crafts in the
bury
middle?
that. But, yeah. I spent too much time studying art history. Questions, opinions?
Any questions or... Oh, we got one?
Yeah.
So I firmly believe all apps are art, whether or not the developers intend them to be, simply because of the emotional impact. And a lot of what you've said really helped contextualize the last 7 months of my life. So I'd just like to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
But I'd like to question where you draw the line between engineering and art or craft. The example you gave with the authentication system, that is something that it is absolutely beautiful. It is fantastic. It shows the elegance of something that's been well thought out. And as much as I would say that is something that has been crafted from the heart, I would also say that's an example of good engineering. You might not be architecting something months in advance, creating this massive system, but that clearly shows someone sitting down, thinking something through, and creating it. And that is, to me, both art and engineering. And I'd like to hear what you think of my spicy little take here.
I need to continue to think about this.
No, you can't stand up here and give a presentation like that and then hide when opinions come back at you. Come on.
I thinking about other engineering friends, like one of my very good friends does bridge and tunnel projects. $500 million projects is common for him. But I think of another friend who's actually an engineer who used to build V8 supercars. And I think, okay, that engineer actually is making things with his hands and crafting things that are masterful. So yeah, there's crossover.
As always, really thought-provoking. Loved the talk. And feel free to say this is a better conversation over drinks afterwards. But my view, and I'm going to be blurry with rules around questions, is that engineering and craftsmanship are just ways of looking at a particular discipline rather than separate or distinct. What are your thoughts on that particular way to approach it all?
To me, I always think of engineering as that very right and wrong approach. There's a solution to the problem. And I'm still pondering this. This is something I've been noodling for a while. I'm out here to be, share some opinions and hear some back, and hopefully take notes and work on 0.7 to eventually get to a first release.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I thought it was really interesting, and yeah, also agree that code can and should be art. You talked about art history, being a love of art history. If you were a art historian in 100 years' time, looking back on the code that you've written today, what would be maybe the top 3 things that you'd hope that they would notice?
I have to admit to being a little post-technical. I don't write as much code as I used to. It's my objective this year to write a little more. And when I think about finishing, like I spend more time building furniture than building code at the moment. And I never get the opportunity to finally sand and finish and call it a finished piece. So I wouldn't say any of my code is finally crafted just yet.
Another opinion from Slack while we're moving the mic around. Neil is posting that beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Very much.
Possibly, it's all subjective, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a pretty thought-provoking talk, so thanks. Well, when I started, which was probably even long before you did, there was no such thing as software engineering. We were just programmers back in the day. And I think the engineering aspect came as a way to sort of productionise things. So you've got the craftsman, you're in the corner there, and you showed us some things which didn't make it into production, so you haven't got the engineering steps around that, which sort of make the thing robust and make sure that it's tested and make sure that it ticks all the boxes. And that's where I think there's room for both things to fit in there. So you've got the craftsman beavering away in his workshop, but you've also got this machine outside of him, which is the engineering part, which people found the need during my career to bring on board. So not really a question, just a comment.
I think, the engineering then is almost the mix of the disciplines.
Yeah, it
bring
brings
them together.
Yeah, it brings. Well, they were trying to bring an engineering discipline because we were all out of control back in the old days, and production code wasn't what it could have been. So they felt like we have to make engineers out of these bloody craftsmen.
It's funny because I studied in a jewellery department that became part of the engineering department, so we'd use their machinery. Yeah.
Question over here.
Can I just supplement that quickly? No, come on. Go. So the thing following up on that, it's like the question I asked myself was, am I an engineer or am I a craftsman? Or what do I want to be? Do I want to be an engineer or a craftsman? I understand there's sort of a difference. I don't know what that difference is. But what I took from your talk was I enjoy myself when I feel like I'm being a craftsman as opposed to the engineer. And you can work with that for version 7 or whatever it is.
That's the soul of the developer bit. Yeah.
Hi. That's building on kind of what they were saying there. Engineers tend to have stricter regulations and guidelines to work within. chemical engineers.
ISO, yeah.
Yeah. Building engineers have building codes to work within. People working in medical field in particular have very specific regulations to work within. Would we be better as software engineers if we had a structure like that? If we had an actual apprenticeship that we had to learn ethics and these structures and legal regulations and things like that to give us the guide rails to make things much better.
Which is funny when you say apprenticeship, because I think of tradesmen.
Because we don't really have apprenticeships. We have, we have junior developers, and then suddenly you become a mid and a senior developer, usually just based on time. We don't have a structured way of doing that. Would we be better if we had that?
No.
Strongly rebutted.
Thank you.
I think it's hard in a discipline that moves so quickly, right? The goalposts that are there today are different tomorrow. Are there any other questions in the room? I think you got one more? Yeah.
Just one
That's still up there.
little comment, maybe. I'm an engineer by
By
diploma.
chosen title?
I was it's actually I was.
Okay.
I'm
You were an
actually
engineer. Okay.
yeah, electrical engineering. But I think going a little bit with Amy is it's just different hats, really. Like when I have to make sure that I meet certain criteria, I put my engineering hat. If I have inputs and outputs, that I have to put my engineering hat.
And I saw your
then
beautiful little
if I-
toolbox.
Hmm?
I saw your beautiful little toolbox.
Thank you. And then if I have wiggle room to put some extra, I put my craftsman's
Mm-hmm.
hat.
Yeah.
And I just want to summarize that I am so much happier as a craftsman
Yeah.
than as an engineer.
Yeah,
But
it's the polish on top.
we still live in a world where that needs products coming out. There is still a chain of payments going in, chain of sold. So it's a life that I abide to, and I don't think it's wrong. But I am a happier craftsman than an engineer. That's all I had to say.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to. Obviously, didn't get my point across well. I'll work on that more. But it's kind of like the engineer is the starter point, and you become the craftsman. It's the honing the skill over the time. Yeah. Thank you.
I think just as an addendum to that, I believe in Queensland the job title engineer is actually a protected term, which you can't have unless you're a member of the Institute of Engineers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll leave that where it is. Thanks, Fletch.
Thank you.